if you think about all the conversations that we have with sellers as they're entering in this process or considering entering into the process, broadly speaking, they have a very low understanding of how to differentiate between various buyers and their models and their structures and so forth. And so think of it like if you were an individual client seeking a financial advisor and you went and interviewed 3 or 4 advisors and they all use the same vernacular: fiduciary, we're trustworthy, we're going to take care of you, very subjective type terms. It becomes hard for you to really distinguish the real differences between those individual advisors. So similar things occur in the broad M&A landscape with buyers. If you don't know the specific ways to categorize them, they all kind of seem the same. And so we thought it would be great to have a mini series where we dive into the various ways that we categorize buyers. And in doing so, also have interviews with buyers that represent each category.
Alan, Darby, Jacqueline Martínez, this is the Buyer's Boardroom. Learn the most about who you are today and where you want to be after. Welcome back, friends and family, to yet another Buyer's Boardroom. I am your host. I am your guide, Rick Music. And with me, as always, Jacqueline Martínez and Alan, Darby. We normally do an episode one at a time. We'll have one guest and we'll do one topic at a time. But we are going to do not one, not two, but 4. I'm skipping 3. We're going to do 4 episodes in a series on how to differentiate between buyers and their models. And this is pretty exciting. Now, it's exciting to us, Alan and Jacqueline, but to our listeners, this may just sound like any other podcast. So why don't you explain to our listeners how important it is that we're setting our show up in this fashion?
Well, first of all, you look fantastic, Rick. I just want to get that on record. Yeah. All right. So if you think about all the conversations that we have with sellers as they're entering in this process or considering entering into the process, broadly speaking, they have a very low understanding of how to differentiate between various buyers and their models and their structures and so forth. And so think of it like if you were an individual client seeking a financial advisor and you went and interviewed 3 or 4 advisors and they all use the same vernacular: fiduciary, we're trustworthy, we're going to take care of you, very subjective type terms. It becomes hard for you to really distinguish the real differences between those individual advisors. So similar things occur in the broad M&A landscape with buyers. If you don't know the specific ways to categorize them, they all kind of seem the same. And so we thought it would be great to have a mini series where we dive into the various ways that we categorize buyers. And in doing so, also have interviews with buyers that represent each category. So the 4 ways that we think it's wise to kind of think about how to put buyers in various categories are as follows. There are structural differences. And what we're talking, that's going to be the focus today. Structural differences would be just their acquisition model, period. Like how do they acquire firms and how do they, structure the actual acquisition itself. So that's one category of difference. The next would be life cycle differences. Where is the buyer on their pathway? There are early entrants, firms that call it $1 billion or so, that are just starting their M&A journey. There are firms on the other end of the spectrum that have done 100 acquisitions and they're $200-300 billion. So that's one way to categorize them, is where are they on their journey? Another way of categorizing them would be autonomy differences. How do they leave or rest decision-making with the seller once they're a part of their team? There are firms that are very entrepreneurial and let you retain a high degree of decision-making and autonomy, often with less support. But then there are firms on the other end that when you join them, you're agreeing to do things their way. So less autonomy, but probably a lot more support and resources. And so that's a way of categorizing buyers. And then lastly would be expansion of capabilities. How do they make you better? And that, was a big definition of what better means. It could be helping with practice management. It could be helping expand your services that you offer to clients, how they help you grow. There's a whole host of ways of expansion of services. So those 4 categories that at Alaris, that's how we see the buyer universe. And we distill buyers, and it can be a bit of a hodgepodge between those categories, but it's going to be a great series, I think, that really helps sellers understand through a different lens of how to view the buyer universe. And so today, with this topic, we're going to dive into structural differences. And we're super excited because we have Glenn Spencer, who is the CEO of Prime Capital Investment Advisors, or PCIA. And then also our long-term colleague, Joe Durant, is going to be joining us as well in our guest session. So it's going to be fantastic, and really excited to get this rock.
Yeah, really excited for having two guests on and really show that both ends of the spectrum for each topic. It'll be fun.
Well, hopefully there's enough room on the bus for everybody, but we got to keep this thing on schedule. I guess, Alan, before we want to get into it, do we want to talk about anything crazy that's happened? I think the craziest thing that happens to me is that we decided to have two guests on the show, but outside of that, is anything wild going on in your neck of the woods? Jacqueline, anything worth mentioning? I feel like we got to get all of our laundry out before we get cracking.
I have one, but Alan, do you want to? I feel like I usually have the...
No, let's hear yours.
Actually, I think yours are always better. Jacqueline, you go first.
Okay. Well, I have this one current opportunity that recently signed their LOI. They're getting their purchase agreements and needed to have multiple discussions about hiring, whether or not to hire an attorney. Of course, it's an expense, and really deciding, is that necessary? Is it wasted money? And our opinion is at Alaris that definitely worth the money, and then even further so when you're selecting an attorney, to pick one that has experience in M&A, and then even better in the wealth management space too. As we talked about on our last episode, there's nuances of wealth management deals that only they understand, and it just makes things run more efficiently. So this seller rather, decided to just have his wife, who is an attorney, but not in M&A, not in the wealth management space, help support him through the journey. And I'm sure it will be fine in the end, but it was a tough one. It's tough. Yeah.
How do you interject something, Alan, before you go? Just for our listeners, I know that this sounds like a bunch of people in the office around the water cooler laughing at the people that we're talking to, but actually, some of these things happen. They're actually designed to help you learn. While we encounter them, and I think we wish they would happen in a general way. These stories, anecdotal as they may be, are designed to teach you something. We know what we're doing and we know what's best, but sometimes you just got to listen to the people that have done this 100 times or more. And sorry if I'm speaking out of school, Alan, but that's what I hear whenever I hear you guys riff. So,
yeah, I think that's right. That's for sure. Yeah, it's all with the end goal of getting through the transaction the most efficient way, best supported by everyone who needs to be involved, and just feeling good in the end. And we see a lot of things that from experience, if handled differently, could be better. But ultimately, it's you make your own decisions.
So, Alan, before we get cracking, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, I think that was good. Not too much exciting in my world this week. It was Thanksgiving. Right. Great.
Well, you had said on the front end of our podcast today that when we're examining the buyer models, there, from a structural standpoint, there are acquisition models fall into three categories. Why don't we start with what we call full acquisition first and see where that takes us?
Well, okay, yeah, there are. When you look at the structure of the transaction itself, what's being acquired, there are three, let's call them dominant, really two, but there's a third one. And that's the full acquisition model, okay, where the buyer is acquiring 100% of the assets of the seller. There is a minority acquisition model where the buyer is acquiring by definition less than 50%, something less than 50. And then there's a third, a less common model where it's not a full acquisition, but it's not a minority. So it's a majority acquisition, less than 100, but more than 50. And so those are the three kind of dominant structures of acquisitions, and we're going to try to unpack those a bit. But from one thing that needs to be kind of talked about is something that we hear thrown about by buyers based on their respective position, is they will refer to themselves as either aggregators or integrators of businesses. Have you ever heard of that, Jacqueline, when someone a buyer says we're an integrator, not an aggregator. So what they're speaking to is the structure and a bit of philosophy on how they view themselves in the role. So I wanted, before we dive into the full acquisition, minority, majority acquisition, I want to speak to this because I think it's really important. The integrator, anyone who calls themselves an integrator, essentially what they're saying is that we are integrating with our partners, meaning they are actually getting in the business with you. Okay, so they're, and these are typically your full acquisition models. We'll touch on that here in a moment, but they are acquiring the business. They are an RIA, so they're not just an investor in RIAs. They are an RIA. You're joining their firm, and essentially you're going to adopt the majority of their processes and whatever they do. So you're going to centralize the operations. They may have a practice management model or client experience they want you to adopt. Certainly an investment platform they encourage you to use. So the punchline is they are in the business of delivering wealth management. You're joining their organization as a partner in most cases. So that when someone says they're an integrator, that's what they mean. When I hear very few people refer to themselves as aggregators. It's usually the integrator trying to distinguish themselves from the aggregator. But when that term is used, aggregator, what they're trying to infer is that buyer is not in the business of wealth management. They're more of an investor. Okay, they're looking to acquire an interest in a seller, and they're not going to do much in terms of getting in business with them, changing many processes or asking them to do things differently. They're basically taking a financial position in that firm and just acquiring that interest amongst others and building a portfolio of these acquisitions that they're not actively running. So that's something I think is very important, is to, when you hear integrator versus aggregator, to know what they're saying.
I think, yeah, there's a semblance of like independence that comes on the aggregator side, maintaining your own branding, perhaps just doing a lot of the things that you used to do from an external perspective. You continue to do that, versus on the integrator side, you're adopting a lot of centralized resources, leveraging the brand of the bigger firm, that sort of thing.
One word answer for both of you, just because of how Alan set the differentiator between the two. Are there people that are there buyers that refer to themselves as integrators? They're in fact more aggregators, but they're just calling themselves integrators because they don't want to be known as aggregators. Are there people that use that?
So I think they do, but it's very easy to spot them. Like if they're saying that with very little intention of actually doing things for you and with you, and we can talk about what that means, but it's very easy to tease those out. So why don't we dive into the first model, which is a full acquisition model. And I would say, Jacqueline, that this would probably be the dominant model that exists out there, specifically from the majority of the national acquirers, even the acquirers, where they're buying 100% of the seller's business. It's typically an asset purchase.
Assets, right?
Yeah, so it's a full acquisition. So let's talk about the philosophical reasons they would do it, and maybe some of the financial reasons that they would prefer a full acquisition model. And of course, we're going to be talking to Glenn Spencer at PCIA today, who does a full acquisition model. We'll get his take on it. But I would say, from a philosophical perspective, the reason that they are doing a full acquisition is because they believe that's the only way that they can materially affect positive change in the seller's business, is if we acquire all of the firm, you're joining our organization, we're aligning all of our, our worldview on how we deliver wealth management, and certainly our operational systems and processes. The only way we can do that and drive real meaningful change on behalf of our partners is if we're all under one ADV, all under one system, and we're all shareholders in the same pie. That's kind of like the philosophical position that I think the full acquisition buyers take. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. Um, and then on the economic side, and maybe using the same example throughout, like, so if we think of a firm that has $1 million of EBITDA, let's say that's a 9x multiple, fill in the blank on what that would be. Um, if if the integrator, if the buyer is it is offering equity as part of the proceeds, then typically that's going to be around the zone of 20% of the enterprise value paid in equity, the rest being in cash, and the timing of that would vary by circumstances. But the key idea here with this full asset purchase is that 20% equity, or whatever percentage that ends up being, that's granted. The share value that's used for calculating what does that translate into for a number of shares in the buyer's equity, that's based on the buyer's current enterprise value. So let's say that deal at 9x, but the buyer is currently valued at a 17x. That 17x is where the equity will be issued. So the buyer's participating in that spread from 9 to 17. So
We're
that's
getting the benefit
great
of
arbitrage, right?
that delta between what they value themselves at to what they bought the seller at. They instantly pick that up on their balance sheet. It's not like something they can spend, as we talked about on a previous show, but it's definitely accretive to the buyer when they're buying an asset at a lower multiple and they're valued at something meaningfully higher. So in that model, you want to buy 100% of the asset, not just a portion of it, right? So that's financially a reason that they would prefer a full acquisition model. Although I think that's certainly a part of it, it's their overriding worldview that we're going to build a unified brand, and we think that we can offer something meaningful to our partners in terms of business improvements, practice management, expansion of services, driving organic growth. The only way we can do those things if we're all on one team fully. We're all committed to the same equity as shareholders rowing in the boat together, which is a very important anecdotal point. Even though you're selling 100% of your business in the full acquisition model, as Jacqueline mentioned, you're often rolling a significant portion of that valuation into the equity of the buyer. And therefore, you're still an owner. You're still a shareholder. So you're selling, I'm doing air quotes, you're selling 100% of the business. You're still an owner, though. And they want you to feel like an owner.
So I was just about to ask, on that note, when I hear full acquisition, those of you listening and you're thinking full acquisition, isn't the reflex on a day-to-day control standpoint, I'm giving all that up if I'm doing a full acquisition? Isn't there?
Yeah, well, that's the big hang up, right? Is control. And so we're going to talk on this on the next model, the minority acquisition model. And we might as well cover it now. We do often get when a seller comes to us and out of the gate, they think that they're seeking a minority partner. Part of the reason, often a leading reason, is they perceive that there's a lot more autonomy and control that comes from the minority sale versus the full sale. Okay. And I think that's partly true, but let's talk about the full acquisition model. So in the full acquisition model, you're selling your business, you're joining this firm. Let's say you rolled some equity, so you're a shareholder in the firm. Sometimes you're an executive of the firm. What do you keep in terms of control? And if you remember back to and when you say control, you have to really define that in granular fashion. Because if you just say control, it seems like a big scary thing that me selling my firm, I'm just losing all control. It's not true. We break control up into 6 major areas of decision-making for the seller. Okay, so there is strategic decision-making, financial decision-making, there's decision-making regarding your staff, there's decision-making regarding your calendar, and decision-making regarding your client experience. Okay, and so when you look at all of those areas of decision-making, you really need to decide, what is this specific buyer allowing me to retain versus give up? Okay, and you'll find, and this is a broad statement, is very specific to the buyers, what you're largely going to be giving up is strategic decision-making. Okay, the buyers have a C-suite with good people who are all they do every day is run the business, and they're the ones making decisions on what is the broad, mission and vision of the firm. Where are we going as an organization? How are we financing ourselves? What new businesses or territories do we need to be in? Those are strategic decision makings that you're largely going to give up. You're also largely going to give up financial decision making, meaning you're not going to manage the P&L anymore, right? I find that most business owners really don't care about managing the P&L. Some do want to, but most just don't care about it anymore. So if you're comfortable with the leadership, strategic decision making shouldn't be that big of an issue. Certainly, if you can look at their history of excellent, performance and success. Financial decision making usually isn't an issue. Staffing is an issue, and you'll find that most buyers, like 95%, want to keep the staff. They want to keep them in their same roles and responsibilities. If anything, there's going to be an expansion of opportunity for them. So you're not really losing anything in terms, and they're going to look to you as the local partner to help guide them on what those people should be doing. Okay, so that's not an issue. The real issue is the client experience in your calendar, and so when we're talking about autonomy and giving up control, that's where you need to focus with a specific buyer in a full acquisition model. Is what decision-making do I keep regarding my financial planning recommendations and my investment recommendations versus what they require I kind of divest to them, and check that box. And then how do they manage my calendar? Am I free to come and go like an entrepreneur I've always been? If I want to go take a vacation, do I need permission? If I want to work remotely, do I need permission? Those things are the two big ones. It's the client experience and the calendar. If you can check those boxes, even though you've done a full acquisition, you'll find that you experience no difference in your control of the business, right? And so when you talk about full acquisition model, you certainly could sell your business to someone who just stripped you bare of all control, but that's just not reality in the industry today. So long-winded answer.
No, but that's what we do. We want to make sure everybody, and again, if you got your questions, hit us at boardroom@alarisacquisitions.com and we'll take your questions on the air. But let's move into minority deals. I'm actually kind of excited about this because one of our guests, Joe Duran, who has spent decades in the full acquisition world, is now entering into a minority space. So Alan, why don't you describe the differentiate, what Joe can expect and how this is going to be a little bit different than where he grew up?
Well, I've been interested in Jacqueline's opinion on this, but in my opinion, when buyers choose to go down a minority route, by default, they're planning on less integration. It's not always true. There are some minority buyers who do a good bit of integration. But to me, a firm that is choosing to only do minority structures is basically saying, we don't want to be in your business, right?
Right. And no, I agree with that. You want to be part of some strategic aspect of it, helping them raise money, but it's really driven by that firm's business model, what they want to do, and then picking that minority investor that is going to help support that. So Joe's Due Firm, Rise Growth, they want to help on a lot of things, but more growth oriented, bringing in organic and inorganic growth opportunities, those types of things. So that's where we see those partnerships get involved, but it's not going to be on the day-to-day business. They're not changing reporting lines of client service folks, things like that you would see more commonly in an integrator model.
Right. They're essentially saying, we love the business and we want to identify very strong businesses that we can become financial partners with. And so they're going to invest in the business. And there's different ways that they do it, but they're not looking to come into your business and start changing a lot of stuff. It's basically, we're going to become your capital partner. We may be participating on the top line revenue. We may be participating on bottom line revenue, but we're not going to be in there saying, hey, this is the staffing model that you should have, or this is the client niche that you need to pursue, or this is the organic growth strategy that we prefer. They're leaving that to you. It's a cleaner transaction for them, where they're not involved in the day in and day out running of the business. So it's like unlike the integrator model where they are in the business, they are an RIA, who you're joining them. The minority transactions are typically, it's more of a financial investor taking a capital position in your business, leaving most of the day in, day out operations to you. So that's kind of like the philosophy.
I guess, like, going back though, I mean, I'm thinking of a few buyers we work with, even on the full acquisition model, that it's still not their culture to require a lot of change in the local office. And, there's varying degrees of integration even within that full
Yeah. So
model too. Yeah.
getting back to the control issue that you brought up, Rick. So she's right. There is the legal aspect of control, and then there's the day in, day out operations of the business and how that manifests itself in control or lack of control from the partner's perspective. So here's what I mean. So you can transact in a full acquisition. You're a shareholder. Typically, you're not a voting member of the share class. But the partnership model in that full acquisition structure is highly collaborative, meaning the C-suite works day in and day every day with the partners who are running their local offices to really determine how the business is going to operate. What they do, what technology they use, what client experience they adapt, what practice management model they use, how are they going to go to market, the investment platform. So it's, even though the shareholders in that business aren't voting shareholders, the way the firm operates every day is with a high degree of autonomy for the partners at the local level. You control your staff, you control your calendar, you control your client recommendations in every aspect of it. And then we're going to work with the C-suite to help shape and drive the overall objectives of the firm. So even though you don't have like legal control, the way the firm operates is highly collaborative and highly entrepreneurial, right?
Yeah.
So, and then go to minorities now. So when people say we want a minority transaction because of the perception of control, I would agree that you, by default, have more control, given what I just said previously, that the minority investor is not looking to get in your business with you. So by default, you're probably going to keep your brand, right, Jacqueline? You're going to keep all your operating systems. Your staff is the same. They're basically saying, we're investing in what you're doing. We don't want to change what you're doing. However, in the legal documents of the minority transaction, you will find that there's very little you will be able to do as the majority owner that doesn't require the approval of your new minority partner.
I want you to underline that statement, because I've been on calls with you where it took a while for people to connect those two dots, because I think there are many people that think minority versus majority plays to overall control, and you've been like, no, you could still have a minority deal. There's going to be a lot you can't do without permission. So like, they're not mutually exclusive, major and minority. I love that. And I want to make sure everybody hears that, because it's so important that, whatever's better for you, major and minority, from a control standpoint, is having that truly unpacked and understood is vital. So
it really is. There's a legal aspect of control, but then there's the reality of how that firm operates, and to me, obviously the legal thing is very important, but if you do a minority transaction, go try to take out a line of credit on your own. Go try to issue new shares to a new partner that you want to bring on. Go try to open a new office or launch any new initiative without the approval of your minority partner.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen. They're going to have total veto rights over things like that they're called minority shareholder protections, and they are going to, even though you are the majority shareholder, they're still going to have a lot of say. I mean, I've seen minority structures where they can actually remove you as the CEO of your own firm. There's obviously things that have to, like material things, but now that's not to say all minority transactions are structured that way. There are those that are quite liberal in terms of their degrees of control, but I just want people who are listening to understand that full acquisitions do not equate to a loss of control. Minority transactions do not equate to retention of control. The nuances are in the details of each structure.
It's a good way to summarize that.
I think it is too. And I think it's worth repeating to all of our listeners. all of this information that we're doing, and I know it's a lot of information, but I want to remind you of why we're doing it. If you're thinking about entertaining any kind of partnership discussion and this isn't top of mind for you, it means you need help. And we're here to do that. We are here because we are thinking of all this, which brings us to the third model. And we went in order of 3. That doesn't mean that number 3 is the best way. These are just things you need to be thinking about depending on what you want to do when you transact. So the third isn't necessarily the porridge that Goldilocks liked best, but our third major structure here is majority. So we've done minority, we've done full, and here we are at majority. Jacqueline, how is this different? What is the difference here? Because for me, they all sound the same a little bit.
The majority, to be candid, we don't really see this a ton. The difference here would be so in the minority, it's something less than 50% of the equity is being sold to the investor. In majority would be anything over 50% or over would be sold. So going back to our $1 million example, it still may command the same multiple depending on certain features of how that cash flow is delivered to the other partner. It could be higher or lower if there's a preferred position or unique features like that. But it would be that same EBITDA generally at the same multiple, but then proportionate to the amount that's sold. So say it was 70% sold, then it would be 70% of that valuation, that sort of thing. In this case, that remaining 30% that is held by the founder, let's say, when that is ultimately sold, then they're participating in that full multiple expansion, that in contrast to the full acquisition model where the buyer is participating from what they bought it at and the current enterprise value, and that current enterprise value being what the shares are issued at. In this case, the firm is retaining 30%. So they when they go to sell that in the future, it would be at the full multiple.
Yeah. All that add along, right, typically.
Right.
And the question is, why would a buyer do a majority acquisition and allow the seller to retain that, in Jacqueline's example, 30% of their own business, their own EBITDA, let's say? Well, in my experience, the reason is they want to do a full integration. So most of these majority acquisition models would be very similar to the full acquisition model in terms of their integration. So you're joining their team fully, adopting the stuff like in the full acquisition model. The reason that they allow you to retain a portion of your EBITDA is they don't want to issue equity in their deal. And why is that? Well, this is very general, but if you look at transactions, period, for most buyers, let's say a firm did 100 transactions, they would probably look at the top 20 or 30 that are driving most of the growth of the firm. Then there's going to be a middle segment that's growing but not setting the world on fire. And then there's going to be a bottom 20 to 30% that are not growing or even going backwards. Yet they all took equity in the deal, okay? And so a buyer would look at that and say that middle third and certainly that lower third are dilutive to the rest of the shareholders who are driving the growth of the business. And so we don't want to take that risk by acquiring firms who aren't going to grow. So the answer is, rather than having them roll that 30% into our equity, we'll just let them keep that 30% on their own. Therefore, if they don't grow in the future, we didn't issue any equity that got diluted for their lack of performance. And when to Jacqueline's point, they are going to be the ultimate buyer typically for that remaining 30%. And so normally what we would see is, they've on this private equity recap process where they acquired you today, they have a private equity sponsor that's backing them. They'll let you retain 30% of your EBITDA. 5 years down the road, there's a new private equity group that comes in, and they're going to make a tender offer to acquire the outstanding shares of the business, or cash flow, and they'll allow you to sell a portion or all of that 30% that you retained in the initial transaction in that liquidity event. And so what Jacqueline was saying is that in doing so, whatever that valuation is, you should receive the lion's share of that. Sometimes the buyers will discount what they pass along to you, but you're not losing any of that delta conversion that you do when you do an equity rollover to a full acquisition model. So the majority acquisition, as Jacqueline said, is not very popular, not very common, but we do see it. And so we had to make sure it was referenced here today.
Well, in review, guys, for those of you listening, just to cover the differentiation between the models of our buyers. We've talked about full acquisition, minority, majority, interlaced with terms like aggregator or integrator. So I want to make sure everybody, before we move on to the next segment, that everybody understands a little vocabulary. Jacqueline, in a short answer, what's the difference between an integrator and an aggregator, just in summary?
An integrator is really supporting the day-to-day business and a lot of the back office functions and branding and growth. There's a lot of resources to support the day-to-day business that will change your business over time. The aggregator is more about independence and not changing a lot of those things, not providing a lot of support for day-to-day operations.
And that's not to say any are better than the others. It just depends on the path that you're going to.
So what is your outcome? What are you seeking? Like a lot of people, to me, it's the integrator model. They're in the business of delivering wealth management, and you're joining their team. The aggregator model, they're an investor in your business. They're not getting in your business with you. So as a seller, what are you looking for in terms of a partnership? Like, there's a lot of things that drive the decision to transact. Certainly the monetary aspects are important, but aside from that, are you looking for improvements in the quality of your life? Like, are you looking to get out of things you hate doing and focus on the things you love doing? Are you looking for practice management assistants, people to help train your organization? Are you looking for expansion of resources and services that you can deliver to clients, makes you more attractive? Are you looking for organic growth initiatives? Well, all of those things typically are associated with the integrator approach, where they're doing the full acquisition. If all you're looking for is a capital partner who leaves you alone, for the most part, and you are going to go continue driving down your own path, then I think the minority structure is probably the preferred one. We do need to. I just want the whole dynamic of the conversation to shift away from control. Because while there is a bit of truth to it, it's not as cut and dry as a lot of people think. It should be more about what are you seeking in terms of the transaction that points you in the direction of either.
Mm-hmm. Right. One's not better or worse. It's just what do you want? Yeah.
Guys, it's time for actually a really exciting part of our show, because we have two dynamic guests. And our first, Joe Duran, who is starting Rise Growth Partners early in 2024. We all have a history with Joe. Alan, I think it's great that he's going to be sitting down with you. Why don't you walk us through what we can expect in that interview?
Yeah, well, obviously, Joe is near and dear to my heart, as well as Jacqueline's and yourself, Rick, all of us being a part of the United Capital team. And so Joe is like foundationally important to me as a human. So I'm super excited about this interview, particularly because he did build at that time, so the second largest independent integrator model in wealth management, United Capital. And now he's launching Rise Growth Partners, which is going to be a minority partner. So more of the aggregator sort, although I don't know that he would use that particular word. So super excited to talk with Joe and find out why he's now on the other side of the integrator model and what he sees as the pros about their approach. Well, generally in that approach, and then particularly about Rise Growth. So super excited about Joe. Okay, I am so excited for this guest, Mr. Joe Duran, someone who is near and dear to me. It is a friend, former colleague at United Capital, and now on a new venture, Rise Growth Partners. The topic today, Joe, is the structural differences between full acquisition models versus minorities. And I literally can't think of anybody better to speak to this topic, having built the large national brand of United Capital as a full acquisition model, and now doing something totally different with Rise Growth Partners. So super excited. Thank you for joining us.
Of course. Alan, I'm just thinking about the many years we've known each other and thinking, wow, I can't believe we've been through so much together.
Yeah,
it's been a couple of decades, I think.
It has. I was actually thinking about that this morning in preparation for the call, and it's been almost 15 years to the date since we started. Well, since I joined your team. Now, we met each other 5 years before that, so it's been almost 5 years since we've known each other. But heck of a journey for sure. And I, personally, thank you from the bottom of my heart, because I can truly say you changed my life. So I really appreciate it.
Well, you changed mine too. So, Alan, I've been very fortunate in my career. I've obviously started what is now AssetMark, sold that to General Electric. Obviously built United Capital, sold that to Goldman, ran that for 4 years or so. I will say, I've been very fortunate in my career, and that's that I've identified where the industry is going. I'm never the smartest guy in the room, but if you're going to be successful in any business, you want to get in front of a wave that's big enough that you can be mediocre and still be all right. Like, get in a board and don't fall off the board and you'll be all right. And I was very lucky that I stumbled upon the finance and wealth business, but it's evolved a lot. And when I think, like, the first business was really one of the first TAMPs in the country, mainly because I thought that people had all these mutual funds that nobody was managing, and somebody needed to be paid to oversee and manage these as portfolios rather than as individual products.
Right.
And the second company was really a solve for the problem that is the underpinning of the entire wealth business, which is what has driven all of it, is the transition from pension plans and to people having to run their own retirement plans, from defined benefit to defined contribution. And, when we started the business, 70% of people had pension plans, and advisors just sold investment products because people knew they had their income taken care of and their healthcare for the rest of their lives.
Right.
When that transition happened, I realized two things. Number one, first, people are going to need better solutions. But second, the real value in the industry is not going to be solving for investing. It's solving for the question, am I all right?
Right.
And what do I need to do to make sure I don't run out of money? And that the level of financial stress and anxiety was going to exponentially grow. And that's, in fact, what happened when we had this chaos of people suddenly being on 401ks and having no idea
To do. Yeah.
how much money they needed to have to actually survive, and then birthed the entire wealth business. And I'm tying this to your question about minority and control. When I built United Capital, I felt that there was not a national firm delivering an answer to the question, what do I need to do to be okay? And so we used behavioral economics and everything else, but what I didn't want to do is do it onesies, twosies.
Right.
I'm like, I want to find firms that agree with this view, and we're going to build the Navy. And at the time, as you remember, focus was out there. There were a bunch of firms taking
Hightower. Yes.
positions and independent advisors. And at the time, minority stakes very often. And everyone said, you're crazy. These are all independent advisors. Nobody wants to do one thing. And I said, well, I don't want that. I want to build the Navy. I want a national brand.
Right.
And so we acquired them. We fully integrated them. We rebranded them. We built this amazing end-to-end client experience, obsessed about answering that question for clients.
Am I okay?
Am I okay?
Yeah.
And at the time, people thought we were crazy. Now, of course, it's the standard, right? Everyone's doing their own variation of an integrated model. And now, like, again, when you started, everyone says you're crazy, and then it becomes standard. Everyone says, well, of course it was going to be that way.
Yeah, I see so many sayings. I see so many sayings now, whether it's from a Merrill Lynch or a bank or even an independent firm, that have all piggybacked off of that behavioral finance rooted process that you were a pioneer in. I think.
Yeah, my wife always says, my God, what would everyone be talking about if you had to come up with this? I think, honestly, I just put voice to it. It was going to happen anyway because it was what people needed. But the phase three, our industry, so phase one is an industry gets created that the current status quo doesn't solve for. That's what happened with the wealth management business. advisors could do things that the big wirehouses couldn't do to answer that question. In phase two, you end up with all these cottage industry becoming institutionalized, and that's what happened with United Capital and the Mercers and the many large wealth enhancement groups, all these great firms that have now emerged. Phase three that we're entering now is different because the market now has this problem solved. So you go from a growth industry where people are receiving something that they've needed but haven't been able to get. Now everybody knows that they can get it. And most of the people who need it have received it. So what changes in phase three? You go into what I'll call a market share game. It is no longer that the whole sea is swelling and everybody can do well. It now matters because the pie is not growing exponentially. It's growing, but not the way it was. Because everybody has an advisor. And if they don't, they're going to get one, and there are many, many, many solutions. And so when that happens, the rules become different. And this is what's going to be true 5 years from now. And I live in the future.
Yep.
That's everything I've ever done is not where are we today, but where are we going to be 5 years from now. Where we're going to be 5 years from now is we're going to have multi-trillion-dollar wealth management firms. Those firms are going to be no different than Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley with a specialized skill set. There will be some overlaps, but the wirehouses will always be broker-dealers with a set of rules and solutions that independent RIAs will not be able to do, but the independent RIAs will have solutions that no wirehouse can do, whether it's tax prep, whether it's doing estate planning, whether it's bill paying. There will be things that you can do as a fiduciary that no global bank will be able to step into because of the regulatory oversight. And Lord knows I experienced that as a partner at Goldman.
Right.
And there's no negative criticism here. I had an amazing time with amazing partners. But there are things that they could do that we could not do as an RIA. And it's also conversely true that there are things an independent RIA can do that a big wirehouse cannot do.
Right.
And so for me, what happens when you're in a market share game is three things have to happen. Number one, you have to have an exceptional brand. And why we're taking minority stakes and not control positions is firms that already have these three things figured out, I'll share with you what they are, they're already at full valuation. And they are the firms that are going to go acquire the the smaller firms. But it is very hard in a market share, in a consolidating industry, if you don't have a great brand, if you don't have a truly exemplary and distinct client experience that gives you a competitive advantage, and lastly, if you don't have operational excellence, all of which require money, all of which require expertise, and all of which a firm with $1 billion to $5 billion cannot afford to do. And so what happens in a market share game is there are plenty of lifestyle businesses, there always are, that's true in the accounting, the legal profession, that if you want to get to size, you have to solve for those three things.
Okay.
And either you do that by joining a firm and selling control and basically losing your entire history and heritage to become part of the mothership brand, or you do it yourself. And unfortunately, if you're doing it yourself, money's not enough. And that's why we've built Rise, is to say, hey, money is part of the equation, but not the really important part. And it's not for everyone. 90% of advisors should sell their entire business 100% to a strategic because they don't have the desire, ability, or commitment to do it.
Yeah. So that's a great point. And I want to ask something you said a second ago, but quickly. I agree with you. When we talk to firms that think they want a minority investor, they usually are coming at it from two lenses. One, they feel like they have a lot of gas in the tank. They haven't told their story fully, and therefore they don't want to release that entrepreneurial vision by joining, like you said, and losing your entire history. So that's part of it. But secondly, they also equate it to a loss of control. The minority structure gives them more control than the full acquisition. And but the thing that they miss often is if they take, and I'm really interested in your position on this, but when you take a minority investor, there's an expectation typically of performance. And some of them really have a lack of understanding on what that expectation might look like. Depending on the capital partner, of course, there needs to be a big asterisk there. So I'm curious as to what is your perspective on control? Because I've seen full acquisitions where the seller joining the firm is given, the larger firm is given a great deal of flexibility and control in how they operate, their client experience, their calendar, and so forth. I've seen minority structures that are quite restrictive, certainly financially. So I know you've got a new model, and I think it's very unique in what you're offering in terms of control. But do you agree with what I just said? Or do you think?
I do to a degree. Here's the thing. If you're selling to a strategic and 100% of the business, whatever control you have is illusory and for a period of time. It is not possible to build a national platform and allow for the independent advisors to do whatever they please. It's just simply not possible to do that in a regulated environment. And you just need to remember, as we create $250 billion, $500 billion,
Right.
$1 trillion RIAs, the regulatory scrutiny they will receive will be not that different than the big wirehouses, with a different set of rules, different than being a bank, but still far greater. And it will require a level of consistency of delivery that will remove the ability. There's some things you'll have a choice in, and many things you won't,
Right.
most especially if they touch the consumer. Now, again, where I think you're absolutely correct is the assumption that I'm going to bring in outside money and I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
The reality is most firms do not have the skill set or ability to execute at that level. And so I've had, again, as I do what I do, I get to talk to all kinds of advisors, typically in the $5 billion, $3 billion level.
Mm.
And they're the firms that think that I can have a $5 billion firm and I'm going to get to $15 billion, allowing everyone that joins me to keep doing what they've been doing. The value of that business, if you're a collection of advisors versus an advisory firm, those are two very different things with two very different economic values. And by the way, one is a great asset and one is a highly risky asset. Here's the dilemma for most individuals. Am I running a lifestyle business? In other words, am I running a business that's really to reflect the life I want to lead, or am I building a business? And the number one thing when we're a minority investor is we don't have controls. So we have to be super careful about, are we backing a business or an individual?
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, our industry is filled with a cult of personality.
Sure.
Like, great personalities do great work, but not everyone is suited to diminishing their role, because there's an inverse relation between the value of the business, the dependence on any one human being. There's a reason nothing I've ever built has my name on it, because we need to have great people and a great brand. And there are some people like maybe Ken Fisher or Rick Edelman that had both. I was never smart enough to know how to do both. And I always want to attract really brilliant people, and I focused more on the brand. What we're doing with this is saying we can identify the next 6 to 8 great firms before they get to where they need to get to, and bring partners who actually know and have done it, so that we can identify the blind spots. Because it's hard. When you go from $1 billion to $3 billion, $3 billion to 5, 5 to 10, there's a set of things you have to get right and a set of mistakes you're going to make.
Right.
And if you're with people who've made those mistakes, they can, if they're the right partners, they can do more than give you money.
So,
Because the one thing we hear always from people who take a minority position, they get annoyed at paying and having this dead money on the balance sheet that does nothing
right.
to actually help you get to where you're going.
So what Joe is speaking to, for those who are listening, is often you take a minority capital partner, they put money on your balance sheet, they expect it to go be put to work vis-a-vis typically acquisitions or some other type of inorganic growth strategy, and that's pressure. Like when you have that, like that's real pressure. But okay, so
Especially more than that, they do nothing to help you.
Right.
So you've never done it, and all of a sudden you're meant to do it, and you have to figure it out. And then every quarter they're coming to you saying, why didn't you do it? And I always share it with the folks we talk to. The difference between me and I've got Terry Carlson, who's amazing, helped to build Wealth Enhancement Group. ran Schwab's retail business, and the difference is we've been there.
Yeah.
We know what you're about to experience. So you don't need to tell us whether you're having a bad quarter or not. We pretty much know why.
Right.
We also happen to know potentially here's some ways to fix it. What we can't do is tell you that you must do it this way. And that's what we wanted to change, because I think the thing that's frustrating from running an integrated firm is that you don't want to put shackles on the people that are most successful, and having ownership, true ownership of your exact piece, it matters. That's why I love the minority stake, because even at United Capital, the real organic growth happened from a handful of firms.
Right.
And they, while they did fine, were also dragging along a bunch of firms where people were not working as hard.
Exactly.
And it frustrated them to no end. But like, okay, Joe, you're doing your bit. We're doing our bit. What about these other 80%?
We're getting the same benefit of the
Play golf all day, and they're getting the same equity lift. And there might be the people who joined us, the top people, making more money, but they're not getting equitized. And that's ultimately how you get rich in America. You've got to be able to equitize it.
Right.
And so I didn't want to be in that position anymore. I'm like, I'd rather just back the racehorses who want to run and give them the tools they need to get to where they're going, and let them keep 70% of the equity, because they were completely aligned. And that's where I always believed we had no internal conflict or misalignment. And while that was true, there was a group of people who were participating who were not carrying the fruit.
Right. It wasn't like a structural misalignment. It was just the reality that some people were, they were coasting. They weren't really in it to grow and really take it to another level.
And they didn't need to, because they knew that, hey, the team at United Capital and these group of advisors, they'll carry the freight. And they did.
Okay, so you touched on something that, pretend like you and I are at a bar and we're just having the conversation, and I have to have these conversations with people, sellers. You have these conversations with them, and it's that issue of the lifestyle practice. How do you? I know how I do it, but when you're in a conversation with an owner of an RIA or owners, and they're telling you they want to go to the next level or they want to consider taking Rise Growth as a partner, you know that they're a lifestyle practice and really aren't suited to be a partner of yours. Is what are some of the traits that you would say, oh, that guy, that's a lifestyle guy, he's not someone that will.
So there are three things we look for right up front. And this is something anyone can use. And we do this with everyone, including our own employees. Willingness, ability, and capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So are you willing to do it?
Right.
And willing means not just you say you will do it, you're willing to pay the price. Mm-hmm. And that's really important, because there's a price to be paid. Number two, do you have the ability to actually execute on it?
You got to be honest.
Again, that's one thing to say, I want to do it.
Right.
It's another thing to say, can I actually do it? And then third is capacity. People often blow ability and capacity. Capacity is, do you have the resources necessary to execute? If I find somebody has the willingness and the ability, we can help you find the capacity, whether it's the money, the people, or the talent. But what I find very often is we confuse the success it took to get to where we are with what it's going to take to get to where we're going. And the reality is, you cannot get to where you're going in an exponential sense by doing what you've done. Because the reason you're not there already is that you have a set of decisions and constraints that you have existing, which are the reason you're not 5 times bigger.
Right.
And this is a very confounding thing. And I learned this because I go up to the Silicon Valley all the time with these exponential growing companies. And I call it the success paradox. Most human beings, 99% of people who are successful, suffer from the problem that go, I've been successful because I've done this. Mm-hmm. And what I found with the exponential growers is they actually said, instead of looking at their success and saying, I've gotten here because of this, they ask themselves a different question. What am I doing that's constraining me from not being 3 times bigger?
What do I have to stop?
So taking the same thing and saying, what needs to change? Because there was a combination of things that could have caused me to be 5 times more successful than I've been.
Right.
And it's usually all the things you think are sacred are actually holding you back from getting to the next level. So if we meet somebody who says, I want to be 10 times bigger, and I want to do this, but I don't want to change anything. I like doing it the way I'm doing.
Right.
It doesn't matter how much you tell me you want to do it, because all growth, 100% of growth, personally, professionally, business-wise, all growth requires change. It's not possible to grow without change.
Right.
Not as a human, not as a husband, not as a dad. Everything you do in this world that you have grown from required change, and often painful change. Change that required you to change all of your perspectives about what opinions were wrong, what facts were false, and what things needed to change. And not many human beings are humble or willing enough to say, wow, and this is the hard part, I've been doing it wrong this whole time.
Hey,
It's been good enough.
apparent success, right?
Yeah, because you're blinded by your own success. And I've always just relished in the anguish that happens when you learn, oh my Lord.
Well, I think this part of
have
willingness is like, I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but you only really gave me 2 pieces of advice when I started with you at United and trying to vet who would be a good partner. And it was, do you like them? Because if you like them, Alan, odds are we're going to like them. Thought that was very insightful. And secondly, are they humble? Are they humble? And willing to do exactly what you're saying. Say that, okay, not that you're saying you're not proud of what you've done historically.
No, but
you're willing. There may be a better way. Yeah.
humility needs, it comes from one place. Are you willing to be wrong? Like I always say to people at the end of any speech that I give, my wrap-up is always the same wrap-up. And anyone who's seen me has seen us. I'll say, when they say, what's the one thing you're telling them? I'd say, the most important question that any human should ever ask themselves, what if I'm wrong?
Right.
Because the openness to be wrong is what makes you the best version of yourself. Anytime somebody thinks they cannot be wrong or that their opinions are facts, it leads to bad outcomes. It leads to failed relationships. It leads to failed success or not optimal outcomes. The reality is the humility, and that's the core of humility, the possibility of being wrong about yourself, about everything around you, about what you're doing. And it goes completely contrary to what you think success is about,
Right.
which is certainty and conviction. While I am a person with a lot of passion and a lot of views about the future, all along the way, you will never succeed if you're not adaptable. And adaptability requires your ability to say, what if I'm wrong, and course correct? Because you have to have persistence, but at the same time, you need flexibility.
If you're persistently
And that's
doing
why a
something
minority
wrong,
investor, the structure we're creating is to allow for us to, we're really, when you think about what we're doing, we're trying to be sort of an expert guide. Because here's the thing I know about building businesses. It will never be what you thought it was going to be. Like when you set off on a voyage, I'll use a voyage as an analogy. When Christopher Columbus was trying to get to India, he set out planning to go to the spice trade and find a shortcut. He ends up in America, which is a much better outcome,
Right.
with much more riches than existed in India. But it's not at all where he expected. So if you're going on a voyage and you have a conception about what you want to get to, which is really important, you also need to understand that all along the way, you're going to need to create stops. And along those stops, you're going to need to course correct. You're going to need to change the nature of your ship. You're going to need to change the nature of the people on it. You're going to need to say, hey, is there an outcome that we need to adjust our perspective about where we're going? And again, in that mindset of just get me to the next way station, the next stop, or the next oasis, that's a useful way to think about the voyage. And if you think about each leg of the voyage requiring a different set of skills, with a bigger boat, with more turbulent oceans, with different skill sets required, that's the way to think about business building. And what we're trying to do is be an expert guide. Hey, we've been to the other side.
Right.
And we don't know exactly where you're headed, but we do know the kind of boat you're going to need for this next phase. Because the reality is you need different skills at 5 billion than you needed at 1 billion, at 10 billion and at 20 billion. Different sets of skills and abilities. And you as the leader, as the founder, you have the responsibility of understanding. And our job is not to tell you how to do it. It's to give you insights so that you can make the best possible decision and ideally not get swept up in the tornado that's going to hit you at this phase.
Right. Well, there's a lot of wisdom in there, Joe. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to spend with us and share. We're really, really excited about what Rise Growth is going to be doing, and certainly at Alaris, we hope to be big parts of your success in the coming year. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Anything you didn't get on that you'd like to share?
No, again, we have a glorious industry. There's nothing but opportunity in front of us. And as long as we keep evolving and doing great things for consumers and for clients, there's nothing that this whole industry can't do to really fundamentally improve the future for our country and for everyone whose lives we touch. So I'm super proud.
15 years ago when I started, 15 years ago when I started with you, I thought we were in the second inning. I think we may be in the third now. We've got a lot of to go. So, all right, Mr. Duran, thank you very much.
Thank you, of course, Alan. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, cheers.
Great interview, Alan. I'm really, really excited to see where this goes for Joe, but I'm sure he's destined for continued success. Rolling right into our next interview, somebody else that we really, really like, Glenn Spencer of PCIA, that is Prime Capital Investment Advisors, and he's going to take a different approach in this next interview. Alan, what can we expect with your call with Glenn?
Well, Glenn, they're one of the up and coming superstars, I think, on the wealth management front in the country. PCIA just a few years ago was $10-12 billion, and I think they're knocking on 27 billion. Yeah. So fantastic growth. Glenn has a remarkable pedigree and background in running and managing large financial services oriented firms. Started with PCIA not too long ago and has already made a huge impact. And so he's going to be speaking to the integrator model, which is the full acquisition model, and why that he believes that is the preferred approach for any seller that's considering a partnership. So he's got a lot of information to share, very wise and also quite entertaining. So it's going to be great interview.
Yeah.
Okay, Alan Darby with the Buyers Boardroom. I am super excited to have our guest, Glenn Spencer, CEO of Prime Capital Investment Advisors. Glenn, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, man. I love the smiley face on the lapel. Very cool. You're always bringing an upbeat personality to any meeting I've been in with you anyway, so it's appropriate.
I want to bring joy and happiness to the world.
That's right. Well, I am excited about this topic. As we've shared with you, we're doing a series to help sellers really understand how we kind of segment the market in terms of buyers. There's a bunch of you guys out there, and if you really don't know how to tease out the subtleties and differences, you can all sound kind of similar in terms of the value proposition. And so at Alaris, we have a very specific way we do that. We thought we'd share those points in a 4-part series. This is the first one. And the first way that we sort of look at the buyer universe, one of the ways we distinguish between different buyers is their structure of their acquisition model. And the two dominant acquisition models being a full acquisition model versus something that's not a full acquisition, typically a minority structure. And so I know PCIA's model is a full acquisition model. So I have some questions I want to ask you, Glenn, about why you chose that model. What are the pros that you think that a full acquisition model brings to the table? And of course, dive into any nuances associated with that. Of course, I'd love to hear about PCIA at the end and give the folks a little bit of a sense of what you guys are building there, because you're clearly one of the, I think, one of the dominant acquirers out there, and are doing a fantastic job. Certainly with the partners that we've brought to you, they're all thrilled with their choice. So why don't I quick start and just say, why did PCIA choose to build your inorganic growth strategy around a full acquisition model? What was the thought behind that?
I'd say the first, I guess we start with the business that we're in, and at I like to think macro to micro, but at the highest level, we're in a professional services business. So we see our business very similar to consultants, accountants, law firms. So we're in the professional services business, and we're trying to build a world-class professional services firm. If you ask me what ultimately we're trying to do, we want to be the best professional services firm in the world.
Right.
So if you think about professional services firms in general, you go to a big global law firm because you want the collective intelligence of their organization. You do the same thing with a KPMG, whether it's McKinsey, KPMG, Boston Consulting Group, or a big global law firm. You want the collective intelligence of that organization. And so when we bring people into our organization, we want to embrace everything that they bring to the table, and they inevitably bring intelligence to our organization or expertise to our organization that we didn't possess before, and we want to retain that forever.
Sure.
And so, a lot of the minority interests, you could be minority to majority. That's different than minority to exit. So minority to exit would be like a private equity firm, and minority to exit, if you just start there, would be they're in it for a financial transaction. And that's really not what we're trying to do, because we're building an enduring financial services firm, right? So we don't want to bring expertise into our organization and then just let it go. So we're clearly not in it just for the financial aspect of it. So then if you say, well, gosh, I'm a minority, but I want to go to majority, then we start thinking about, okay, alignment of interests. So if I buy a minority stake and then we're wildly successful as partners, I just increase the purchase price that I would have to pay down the road.
Right.
So I'm kind of harming myself there in a way. So I think it starts with, we're in the professional services business. We're trying to build this enduring organization over the next 20 years. And we want perfect alignment of interest.
Yeah.
And so I understand that people a lot of sellers feel like, gosh, I haven't reached the end yet. I've got a long runway. I'm just hitting my peak, and I want to get the economics out of that. Well, we feel like we can give them the economics while acquiring their entire organization. We can do that through earnout, incentive comp,
equity. How about that? Well, that's something that I want to come back to your opening statement about building a professional services firm, but you're touching on something that we find at Alaris we have to dispel quite frequently, and that is the notion that when you're doing a full acquisition, that you're no longer an owner in the business, and that's not true. It's the full acquisition is merely the buying entity is acquiring 100% of the assets of your firm, but the consideration that they're paying can be different forms. You can have cash, obviously, but you can also roll a portion of your valuation into PCIA's equity. And so you're still an owner. You're just a smaller percentage of a larger pie. And hopefully one like PCIA who's, growing faster than the smaller practices did on their own. Economies of scale are kicking in. So your profitability, your EBITDA margin starts to expand. You can deliver more in terms of a client experience, technology, because you have the capital to invest and things like that. And so selling 100% of the acquisition is not, or sell of your practice is not equivalent to stepping out of being an owner in the business. In fact, in the PCIA model, you're a partner. You guys have a really collaborative environment where you seek their input, which you're going to come back to later. But you mentioned that you want to build the best professional services organization in the world. That tells me that you have an opinion on how to do things. Like there are certain things that you believe you're bringing to the table that would be accretive to your partners. Like, and that's, I think, sellers, the ones that are humble, and it's not that they're not proud of what they built, but they can look introspectively and say, hey, there's some things that we could probably learn, maybe do things better, whether it's tech, client experience, investment platform, practice management, you name it. So that's where I see a bifurcation between the buyer models. The full acquisition model, those buyers tend to believe that they're bringing something to the table that benefits their partners, whereas the minority transactions, it is more of a capital partner. It's like, look, here's some money. We want to help you see you grow. We'll give you some strategic input, hopefully along the way, but we're not going to get in your business, and would you agree with that? That's what I see as a big point of difference.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that point up. I mean, I've said at some point in every acquisition we've done 25 acquisitions in the last 4.5, 5 years, and I ultimately look at the owner of that other business and say, hey, I know there's things you're doing better than what we're doing, and I know there's things we're doing that are better than what you're doing, and both organizations should get better. Like, I don't ever want to do a transaction where we don't get better as Prime Capital, and I want you to feel the same way on the other side. So it's not always the same thing. It might be we have better marketing expertise. It might be our investment platform. It might be our financial planning. It might be the fact that we have a retirement practice. Mm-hmm. But there are things that we're doing that are going to bring value to an acquisition. And I don't want to buy a firm that's not going to bring value to us, whether it's a particular approach they use for financial planning or investments or whatever. So what we really want is to attract that entrepreneur who wants to continue to build a business in their likeness while being part of our team. And I think that's the difference. I mean, if you look at, I'll go back to a big global law firm, they have some, there's some mass tort environmental liability person out there that has an expertise that another law firm doesn't have. Well, the trick would be to bring that person in, embrace their expertise, use the relationships that other attorneys have to create opportunities within that person's lane. At the same time, maybe they're not great at marketing, and the new law firm could bring marketing expertise to them. So it should be a two-way street in our mind, where we bring value and they bring value.
Well, I think that having an opinion on that's one of the benefits to the full acquisition model is we see, and you can measure this stuff, right? Like, you can measure key performance indicators. It's not the only way to measure improvements in a business, but it's a way, and you can see revenue growth, EBITDA margin expansion, client satisfaction scores increasing, client terminations decreasing, wallet share going up. All of these things, which are a direct result of your ability as the partner, the buyer in this scenario, to affect positive change in the life of your partner. And that would be really hard to do if you weren't all one organization, right? If you weren't on one ADV, common operating systems, common team members, things like that. And that's where I think, from an integration perspective, if you're a seller and you're at a point in your career where you can say, look, I think there may be better ways of doing things, and yes, I would like to see tangible improvements in my life, however you would define that. You might be able to bring that to me, and the only way that I can receive those is in the full acquisition model. The minority structures, they really don't care to get into that with you as a partner. And that may be appealing to certain sellers, but a lot of them, they want these changes. They want these positive improvements.
Well, the number one metric that we measure, Alan, is growth. And on average, across all those acquisitions that I mentioned, we've doubled the revenue growth within a 3-year period of time. So I think that speaks for itself. When you're growing that fast, margin expansion is a natural, because you can't actually spend money fast enough if you're growing your revenues at 25-30% a year. So you get natural margin expansion. But we focus on revenue growth. We think that's the best metric.
Well, that's I agree, and that's phenomenal growth. I got to ask the question because I know there are some people out there hearing, "Oh my gosh, my work week went from 40 hours a week to 80 hours a week." That's not what you mean. You mean growth in your world, where a lot of capacity has been created by getting them out of things that they probably shouldn't be doing or don't enjoy, freeing up time, surrounding them with resources, and then also probably helping them with organic growth. And so it's growth in your world, which is a lot easier to achieve than as a standalone.
Well, that's a really good point. I mean, the numbers. The average independent RIA in the United States has less than 10 employees. So the 2 or 3 owners are not just advisors, salespeople, marketing people. They're the chief compliance officer and the CFO and the director of HR and the chief operating officer. So they're wearing all these hats that we're able to take away, give them back a bunch of their time to really focus on clients and getting new clients.
Yeah,
So,
because what they got in the business to do in the first place.
which is why they absolutely.
Okay, so here's something that I want to see if you agree with me or not, and this is on the issue of autonomy. And so normally, Glenn, when we're talking to a firm that's considering a partnership via acquisition, if they come into our preliminary meetings and they're espousing a full acquisition or a minority structure, if I find that when they come to the table and they're thinking minority structure is probably for them, they're usually doing so under the assumption that doing a minority transaction means that they retain all of their autonomy. And conversely, if they did a full acquisition, they'd be losing all of their autonomy. And I try to kind of clear that up a bit. And it's really rooted in the reality that I know full acquisition partners, buyers, that in their organization, it's a highly entrepreneurial organization. The partners have a great deal of collaborative input. They certainly control their calendar and their client experience and all that. I know minority structures, on the other hand, where it's quite oppressive in terms of what approval they have to get from their minority partner in order to really do much. Talk to me about your perception in those two models about in either case, what the autonomy reality is going to look like for the seller.
Sure. I would say I would start with a question of like autonomy of what, and so the way that we look at it is the closer it gets to the client, the closer the service gets to the client, the more autonomy we want to give the organizations that are part of us, whether it's been an office that's been here 20 years or whether it's an acquisition. So financial planning, investments, client service model, all that sort of stuff. The closer you get to the client, the more autonomy we want to give our partners. And the closer it gets to back office functions, the less autonomy we want to give them. I mean, we want to be as efficient as possible. So accounting, employee benefits, real estate, finance, compliance, like all that stuff and compliance would start getting a little closer to the client, right? So
they have to do compliance, but they have to be compliant, right? But you don't want them messing with the regulators or having to fill out, send out privacy notices and things like that.
Exactly. We don't want to create an oppressive compliance environment that starts to impact the client relationships or the way the advisors interface with them. But the point being that, don't tell me you need your, employee benefits, your same employee benefits. Don't tell me you need to keep your same real estate broker. Like the client doesn't care about your real estate broker.
Right.
And so let's get as efficient as possible on that back office stuff. And let's give you a lot of autonomy on that front end stuff. And we want to buy high quality businesses, and a high quality business by definition, they've got a lot of clients that have been with them for a long time and trust them because of the service they provide, that stuff that touches the client. So why would we buy a business and then make them undo that client service aspect of the business or the part of the business that's valuable to the client? So we give them a lot of autonomy in that regard.
Yeah.
I think I'd add to that like we spend a lot of time like, what's the magic of this business? What makes this business successful? What makes this business tick? And we know we can't undo any of that. Like if their story is, I'm the greatest investment genius in the world and this is why, well, we can't ask them to untell that story they've been telling their clients. Or their story might be, hey, we've got this really unique financial planning process that we take our clients through, and that's why you should do business with us. Well, we can't bring that organization on board and tell them they need to change their financial planning process. Right. So again, all that stuff that touches the clients, we want to provide a lot of autonomy to those organizations. And the stuff that doesn't touch the clients, we want to get as efficient as possible.
Yeah, which I find it's a rare thing when someone tells me they want to retain compliance oversight, or they want to keep managing their tech stack, or HR. That they're happy to get that stuff up. Okay. Well, this has been fantastic, Lynn. I really appreciate you taking the time. Before we go, I'd like you to, we haven't really asked so much about your firm. I'd like to give us a quick 2-minute commercial, as it were, on PCIA. Maybe start at like the size of the firm and what you guys are building, because I think it's fantastic.
Sure. We're about $27 billion in assets under management. I think the relevant point of 27 isn't, we're not the largest, we're not the smallest, but we've gone from 2.7 billion to 27 billion. So we've grown tenfold in the last 5 years. We've got about 180 advisors. You pointed out earlier, I think we're the only national investment advisory firm that is advisor owned. So of our 180 advisors, 120 our owners have significant ownership stake in our firm. I think another aspect that's a little bit different about our firm, we're mostly wealth management. We're about 75-80% wealth management, but we've been in the retirement plan consulting business for over 20 years. We've got 1,000 retirement plans and over $10 billion in assets under management in retirement plans. We're 98% fee-based financial planning, but we do have a broker-dealer outlet for those advisors that's a important part of their business. So I think we're flexible to the point that we've just described, in terms of, we don't ask someone to join us and change their story. We want to embrace who they are. Mm-hmm. And again, we want that entrepreneur who wants to be part of a larger organization that can bring different resources that maybe they don't possess. So I guess that's us in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, for those who are just hearing about PCIA, I consider one of the top buyers in the country, building a fantastic organization with great people and a true partnership, which we very much look for. I think entrepreneurs who have built a business, they have that fierce entrepreneurial DNA. They want to continue that, and PCIA is a great home for them to reap all the benefits of the larger organization with scale and resources, but still have that entrepreneurial spirit. So
one of the things that I wrote down before this call that I didn't have a chance to say was, gosh, we would never ever want to turn an entrepreneur into an employee.
Yeah.
So that's ingrained in our thinking.
Well, fantastic. As always, Glenn, I appreciate the time. We'll be rooting for your Chiefs. You guys are in Overland Park, Kansas. So I know you guys are, it's not like you're not used to winning. Now you have to go on the road, so we'll see.
This is true. Well, thanks for rooting for our team. We appreciate it.
All right, Glenn. Thank you, sir.
Guys, we're back. And another great moment with Glenn Spencer of PCIA and Integrator. Anecdotally, I don't know if this is widely known, but I had a visit with Glenn at his home office, and they are so integrated that they actually have a family band. So for those joining their firm, if you are musically inclined, can you sing? They actually have a band of partners and employees and all the rest that practice and play year round at some of their events. So I think they are fully integrated, and I love that.
Is Glenn in the band?
I don't think Glenn is in the band.
Okay.
He's the roadie.
That was
right.
That was a great interview, my man.
Thank you.
Well, now is time, and we're coming to the end of our show, and we're up against it. And again, this was episode 1 of a 4-part series that'll take us through the holidays and into the new year. But we always like to finish with our mailbag section. So that's boardroom@alarisacquisitions.com. That is boardroom@alarisacquisitions.com. Send us in a question. Are you a seller? Are you a buyer? Are you anything in between? We are here to answer those questions and hopefully deliver one on air. And we have one seller, I think they're a seller, but they're not really sure. Joe writes in from Atlanta. I have $55 million in AUM. I'm 42 years old and I'm at a crossroads. I know that I really can't sell my practice for anything. I don't know that anyone would really be interested in me if I did, but I'm also worried if I grow my practice with or without somebody else, if I do it now, I won't have anything to sell later. What do I do? My reflex on this, Alan, was a call we did earlier this week where someone was, this could have been the same guy. Someone was at a crossroads because of where he was in his career. I think he was 44, the guy we talked to on Wednesday. And I think it's a similar question. It's almost verbatim. Like, I don't really know what I should be doing, but financially, selling doesn't really make sense to me. And you said something on the call about, yeah, you have to have a conversation on yourself. And it was, again, I don't want to steal your thunder, but betting on yourself versus partnering. And I think that's what this question is asking is, what do I do? Yeah. How do I weigh the pros and cons?
Smaller firms, like, by default, are going to command a lesser valuation. It's just the reality of the situation. So my guess, without really diving into this gentleman's situation, is he's the quintessential lifestyle practice, which we see often from smaller practitioners, call it 200 million or less, where if you look at their EBITDA margins, they're running like 70%, 80% profitability. And so they may have $1 million of revenue, but they're making $700,000-800,000 a year, right? And so that's a lifestyle business. That means you have not invested in your infrastructure if you're running at 80% margins, just period. And that's actually more problematic for buyers. So when you go to sell that business, a smart buyer is going to come into that and they're going to add expenses to your P&L to properly support that business, probably to get it to, call it 35, 40% operating expenses. So versus 20 in the current lifestyle scenario. So what that means is if you go to sell that business, you're probably not going to extract a ton of value out of it that would replace that $700,000-800,000 that you're taking out of it each year. And that's the math calculus that they go through, is that, well, wait a second, if I sell this thing, I'm only going to get call it $2 million. I'm taking $700,000 a year out of this. I could just keep the business. Well, that's true. Like, if that's all there is to the equation. But this is where, in the call we had earlier, you really have to be serious and ask yourself, and all of this is somewhat age dependent, by the way, but if you're younger, if I trade my business, I sell my business and join a larger organization, obviously the upfront check, as it were, is not going to be really substantial enough to motivate you to do it. It's the other things that are going to really make the decision for you. What do they do to improve your quality of life? But that's what we talked about before. It's getting you out of all the things you shouldn't be doing: compliance, technology, payroll, billing, all that stuff, to allow you to focus more of your time on client-facing activities. That's a huge win for someone who's got a lifestyle practice. Okay, then how do they expand your resources and capabilities? Making you more attractive to clients rather. That could grow your income substantially. And then what organic growth initiatives are they bringing to the table? There's a whole host of things that are reasons to transact beyond the initial valuation. And the question I would ask is, if I did the transaction and I was a small business like this, I would want to take as much of that in equity as possible. Like, let me roll. If I could find a buyer who would, even at that low valuation, allow me to roll that into their equity, so I'm still an owner in the business. I get all of that stuff that I just talked about, which is going to help me grow exponentially faster than I would on my own. What does that economic scenario look like 10 years from now versus staying on my own? I'm not investing in my business, so you're not going to grow much. That's the issue that lifestyle practitioners have, is like, they never want to invest in their business because it takes away from that massive amount of cash flow they're pulling out of that entity. And that's why they're stuck. You see a business. If I see a business, they're 50, 75, $100 million, and the guy's been there for 15 years, lifestyle business. They're not investing in their business. And so, to answer this gentleman's question is, be like, you got to be brutally honest with yourself. If you look at your last 5 years of growth and remove the stock market from this equation. Look at your last 5 years of growth. That's highly predictive of what your next 5 years of growth are going to be like. Often they get into this and they get a spreadsheet out and they go, well, I'll start growing at 10 to 15% a year. And on the spreadsheet, it just looks overwhelmingly like they should stay independent. Well, if you haven't been growing that way for the last 5 years, again, removing the market, odds are you're not going to grow that way for the next 5 years. You'd probably be way better off economically, as well as all the other things, to join and partner with a larger firm who helps get you on that track. So that would be my answer. But if you want to be a lifestyle business, own up to it and just say, I'm going to suck all the cash out of this until the day I die and just be done with it.
Well, let's take it a step further. That same client is 72.
The seller is 72?
Yeah, same scenario, and the client's 72. The conversation's a little bit different here because...
Well, one is not going to be very many clients who want to do that transaction.
Yeah, the clients are also probably 72, and every day that they wait.
Yeah, if you're... This is a newsflash. If you're over 65... your clients are probably 5 to 10 years older than you are on average. Your business value is likely going to be impaired. This is a stat. I've never done a transaction with someone over the age of 69. It's because they get to the edge of the transaction and, there's a lot of change that has to occur. And they just ultimately conclude, you know what, I'll just keep this puppy and die with my boots on. And I don't fault them for that conclusion, but and that's what we talk, we're off track here, but when we talk about when is the right time to sell your business, to me, once you cross 55, the clock is ticking, in terms of your attractiveness to a buyer, because there's only so much runway you have left at that point. And it's not that if you're 58 or 59, you're not going to have a myriad of buyers looking for your business, but the clock is ticking is my point. You really should start thinking about this, to me, in your early 50s. When is the right time to transact?
Well, right now is the right time to call it an episode. I think this is one of the best. I'm really excited for the next 3 episodes, guys, because I think we knocked it out of the freaking park with this one. And I think anybody watching and listening would agree. 2 great guests, Joe Duran, Glenn Spencer. Thank you very, very much for your time. This has been the Buyer's Boardroom. I am your host, Rick Music. Alan Darby, Jacqueline Martínez, your experts, your Zen masters in the world of M&A. We will see you next time on episode 2.
Thanks, Rick.
Cheers.